Hello, friends. Hello, friends. A tradition unlike any other.
Oh, my goodness. In your life, have you seen anything like that?
There it is! Adam Scott, a life changer. Mashed potato!
Here it comes.
This is the 19th Tee podcast. Kieran Marsh, Nathan Drudy with you. Drudster, very excited for our guest this week, but I must admit when I was pulling together the introduction, I struggled to land on how to describe him because this man wears maybe more hats than anyone else in Australian golf. So obviously former player, architect, most recently a caddy. He's a rider, a statesman. I'd say maybe a generalist is a word it's employment speak these days, but he could be the great golf generalist of Australia. I speak, of course, of Michael Clayton, who's been very kind enough to join us on the show. Clayton, welcome to the 19th Tee.
Thank you. Thanks for that kind of wild introduction, but I guess I've done all those things over the years.
It's phenomenal that we've managed to, I suppose, we've been talking about having a chat to Michael Clayton for the best part of 2 years on this podcast, and I think we get you at such a good time because you got your finger in so many different pies at the moment. I think where we want to start is kind of your most recent, or I suppose most current day-to-day job, and that is on the bag of young Elvis Smiley. So talk us through the last couple of weeks. It's been probably a little up and down for Elvis. We've had him as a previous guest on this podcast, and I must admit, Clayton, I've never found a 20-year-old to make me feel more illiterate than Elvis did. An incredibly impressive young man and very well spoken, and obviously has some remarkable ambitions that match his talent. It's been, I suppose, a challenging summer for him at times, but I'm sure that there's no better view in the house than for you and what you see as what could be a phenomenal career in front of him.
Well, he played okay at the PGA at Royal Queensland. He was finished 12th and kind of scraped it around for him, really. He was up and down 7 for 7 out of the bunkers on Saturday, which turned 76 into 70, which was good. And he made a few putts at the end. So 12th was a decent week. And where did he go after that? I didn't caddy for, he missed a cut at Nudgee. I didn't caddy for him there. Then he came to the Vic Open and missed the cut there by one. Played funny. It was a funny cut. It's a 50 cut, including the women. So it's kind of, it's a tricky cut to make. He shot one under there, missed by one. Went to the Vic Open and played okay. Finished 20th. Not too bad. 8 under. And then I went back to my real job. I was down in Hobart at 7 Mile Beach with Mike DeVries and Lucas and Urian. I was down there last week, so I missed. Where did he play last week? He played at Cobbenbaruga, where he missed the cut again. So he's been a little up and down this summer, but the start of the year, he was terrific. Last year, he was second at Rosebud, third at Bonnie Doon, and second at Concord. So he's going well. He's 19. I mean, the thing I remember the first time I saw Greg Norman play was 1974 in the Interstate Junior Series. He was almost the same age as Elvis is now. He was 19 and playing. I think he was playing number 1 for Queensland, but he won 2 matches out of 5, and he was clearly going to be very good. But we expect a lot of 19-year-olds now when you think that Greg was 19 and playing in the Queensland junior team.
How good do you think he can be, Clates? I mean, he's
got time on his side.
He does. How good do you think he can be, mate? Because I think when we spoke to him, we both walked away and went, like, he could be a PGA Tour winner. He could be a major winner. Like, his game is so good for a 19-year-old, and he's so level, I think, to Marshy's point before. How good do you think he can be? He's got the world at his feet for a 19-year-old, really.
He has. It's always dangerous to kind of predict how 19-year-olds are going to play.
It's fun, though.
It is fun. Yeah. I played with Adam Scott. Here's a story about predictions. At the Vic Open at Cranbourne in 1999, so he was 19, I think, about. And the guy I was playing with said, "What's this kid like?" I said, "I don't know, I've seen a picture of his swing in the magazine. I think he's pretty good." So I've told this story 100 times. Hit this wicked snap hook off the first tee, tried to chip it out of the trees, and he's climbed at the tree, and he barely hit the ball, and he chipped it out and hit it over the back of the green and got it up and down for 6 on the easiest par 5 you've ever seen. I said to this guy, I said, well, I guess he's not that good. So then he smashed it down the second hole, and we're going in with 7 irons. He hit a sandwich to about a foot. Made 3. 8 iron to 6 foot the next birdie. Wedge to a foot at the next birdie. Beautiful 3 iron into the greenside bunker at the par 5. Flipped it out to a foot birdie. Made a 25 footer at the next for birdie. And as I walked on the 7th tee, I said, can you believe how good this kid is? It was like, so it didn't take a genius to work out that Adam Scott was going to be really good. And Elvis is kind of, you think he's in that class. He's got a great swing. He hits the ball well, plays well. He's had some good results. He's had some bad results, but that's predictable for 19-year-olds starting out. When we were 19, it was inconceivable that I don't think there was one under 20-year-old in a state senior team in the country. It was almost inconceivable that a junior could make a state senior amateur team. And here he is, 19, and 17. I carried for him at the Australian. He was like 30th in the Australian Open, and he's nearly winning. I mean, not big tour events, but decent sized tour events down here. So we'll see, but he's good.
Clayton, if there's one thing more dangerous than predicting individuals' futures, it may well be predicting the future of generations. And I want to ask you this about what you've observed, caddying for him, not just this year, but you've done so for a little while now. And you look at the class that he's coming through, because I suppose you look at what we have produced at the world stage now, and you've got the Scott and Day generation, kind of, which drags into Leishman, and then to a lesser extent Smith, who's just emerging now as one of the Australian powerhouses. On the women's side, obviously Hannah Green's a major winner, Minjee Lee's doing phenomenal things, Sue O's making a name for herself on the LPGA. But you look at kind of people around Elvis's age, both on the male and female side, and you would have seen it firsthand in these tournaments you've been on his bag, but just in terms of his class out of the QAS, it was himself, Jed Morgan, now the Australian PGA champion, Louis Dobler's making a name for himself, young Laurie Flynn may well be the most silky of the lot. On the women's side, you've got Karis Davison, Grace Kim, Cassie Porter only turned pro this year, and she's, a couple of top 5 finishes in her first 4 starts. It's amazing, this generation that's coming through now, and I wonder, given the first-hand view you've had of it in the last couple of years, what you see in the future in the next 10 to 15 years of Australian golf, and how that might project onto the world stage.
Yeah, it's always like we were talking about. It's hard to predict. We played with Cassie at Rosebud. She's like really good. She played really well. There's a kid called Amelia Harris who's from Cairns, now lives in Melbourne, who played in the Sandbells Invitational, the tournament Jeff Ogilvie and I ran at Royal Melbourne, Kingston Heath, Yarra Peninsula. I watched her play, and she's amazingly good. And she's 13. But I've said to a lot of people, you go to any one of these tournaments, and there are 30 or 40 kids who, if they were playing on the tour in 1980 when I started, they would have had the best swing on the tour. I mean, they wouldn't have beaten David Graham or Bob Shearer or Graham Marsh or, they definitely wouldn't have beaten Greg. But they all had better golf swings. So there are so many technically good swings now that some of them are going to be really good. Who knows who they're going to be? But I mean, Jed's been he beat Ikea for Elvis in the amateur that Jed won. He played him in the last 8. It was the closest match he had. He beat Elvis 3-2. And then he COVID hit, and he didn't do a whole lot, and he turned up at Royal Queensland and played in a phenomenal tournament. So when he plays well, he's terrific. We played with Louis. I think we played with Louis. Where did we play with Louis? I think the first 2 rounds at Royal Queensland, and he's a terrific player. So there were good players all over the country who let's see how they go. And the girls are Amelia Harris. Like I said, she's 13. Who knows? But she shot 86, which sounds terrible, at Kingston Heath in the first round. But we had the course set up way longer than what Hannah played in last week, because we kind of handicapped it by changing the pars. The men played past 70, women played past 72. So she shot 86 at Kingston Heath. But as Jeff said, it was every day was like Sunday at the Men's Australian Open. And she shot 82 at Royal Melbourne, and shot 74, 76 at Yarra and Peninsula. And I watched her play. I was like, wow, she's really good. Like, great swing, hits the ball really well, great temperament. So, you know, there are kids out there who, and who knows, she might be playing golf when she's 17, but I don't get the feeling that that's going to happen. And Janeth Wong, who's plays at Metro, where I play in Melbourne, she's kind of dominated Victorian amateur golf for the last couple of years, and she's kind of tiny, maybe 5 foot, but she's pretty good too, like really good. And you know, gutsy plays quickly, doesn't bitch and moan and carry on like we all used to, and got a great temperament and just loves to play. It's great fun to watch her play. So, you know, there are a bunch of kids out there who got a chance to be really good.
I guess it's an interesting segue into a question. I wasn't sure where we were going to get to this, but what have you made of the past 2 years of golf in Australia? I mean, me and Marshy have been fairly critical of the way, I guess, the pandemic was managed by our governing bodies, and we felt at times there could have been more done to support our players, whether they're the young generation that you've just mentioned, 10 or 15 names there, or whether it's the older guys who are at the back ends of their career, like your Matt Millers, etc. How have you sort of assessed that past 2 years, and what impacts do you think that might have had on some of those younger players or just the tour in general? Because I think we can all agree pretty universally that the Australian tour isn't what it was 30 years ago, where we were having Greg Norman and you know, even earlier than that, big international players come back. So I guess, how do you kind of put all that together in your head, being so ingrained in the game, Clates?
Well, it's for a kid like Elvis, hasn't been too bad because he's 19, and it's not. You can miss a year or two out of your career at 19, and it's not going to kill you. But like Blake Collier, he finished second a couple of weeks ago. Where did he finish second at? Vic Open? No, somewhere. Vic Open, maybe.
I think it was the Vic Open, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
And he played well last week until the last day. Shot 63, 75 on the weekend, but 25 and 2 years out of career is really not great, because you need to be at that point. You need to be going to tour schools and playing tour schools. So it's hurt those guys a lot. The tour, it was disappointing. They didn't play the Australian Open. You know, I think it was kind of a bit of when I think the local guys are good enough to carry it, and they could have played it for. I mean, I don't know what the deal with the New South Wales government or the sponsors is or was, but you know, it seems to me like they could have played some sort of Australian Open and just played it. And it was the reason Jeff and I put on the Sandbelt tournament, because there was nothing to play on.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to put something on. And fortunately, Daniel Andrews is a golf lover, and he, you know, arranged through Visit Victoria to get some sort of funding for it. And it was I think it's going to turn into a great tournament. So it needs, the tour, when I played it, when it was thriving, survived on state opens, state PGAs, the Australian Open, 3 tournaments in New Zealand, and guys like Frank Williams and David Inglis, who ran the Masters, and Bob Toohey, who ran the West Lakes Classic, and Bob ran about two or three, maybe 3 tournaments. So it was a mix of private promoters, state PGA, state golf associations, and Open, and the Australian PGA. That was what the tour was, and that's been dissipated somewhat because we've lost the private promoters out of the game. Not any private promoters. Frank Williams and David Inglis turned the Masters from a pretty ragtag tournament the first year they ran it in 1979 into a brilliant tournament. But in the end, they sold it because IMG made them sell it to IMG, and in the end it got run into the ground because IMG didn't have the passion for that tournament that Frank and David did. It was Frank and David's job 365 days a year, really. Certainly 364 days a year. Perhaps they took Christmas Day off. But, those guys turned that into a phenomenal tournament. So that's what Jeff and I want to do with the Sandbelt tournament. But, I think what's happened the last year or two is that what it's shown is that we don't have enough women stars to carry women's only events. We do if we have the Australian Open and it's co-sanctioned by the LPGA, which makes it a great tournament. And we don't have enough men's stars to carry a men's tournament unless they all come back. And when was the last time Jason played here? So, and Leishman and Badley and, Adam has been great, but there've been a few guys that have been missing in action. So, but I think if you combine the men and women, we've got enough good players to create decent events. So Hannah was, her last 2 weeks of hers have been terrific. Sue played well at the PGA at Royal Queensland. So if we can get, and I think we can talk Kari into coming back and playing. Sue played with Kari. I played with Sue today at Sandringham when we were talking about Kari. She played with her in that tournament in Florida 3 or 4 weeks ago. And she said, she still hits the ball. I can't believe how well she still hits the ball. And she's kind of...
I'm sure she made the cut that weekend.
Yeah, she played well. And, her short game's not that sharp. And, Kari's pretty hard on herself. And 20 years of when she started, 1995. So, 25 years of grinding out in the tour will wear you out. So, I'm not sure she's ready to come back and play full time. But if we can get Kari to come back and play in Australia 3 or 4 times a year with, and Hannah and Sue and get Minwoo to play and Minji and, the best guys and have mixed events like we've had, then I think that's obviously the future for Australian golf. Because we're not in the game. I'm not sure what's going to happen to this Saudi tour now that Bryson and Johnson are out of it, seemingly. But, we're not in that race in terms of appearance money. But if we can get the best Australians to come back and play. So we've had 3 different formats. We've had the Vic Open, which is 2 separate fields. We've had the Rosebud and Cobham Barooga, which is same field, women playing a much shorter golf course, same par. And we had the Sandbelt tournament, which was same field, but different pars. So we played Royal Melbourne, Yarra Yarra, 70 for the men, 72 for the women. Kingston Heath, 72 for the men, 74 for the women. Peninsula, 71, 73. So essentially the women had an 8-shot handicap, which is a bad way of putting it. But we played the women's course way longer than they've played it in the other tournaments. We played around just under 6,000 metres. I don't think our girls are going to get any better if we play 5,500, 600 metre courses in an attempt to even the scores out, because they're just pitch and putt courses. So Hannah goes out and shoots 20 under par and wins the tournament, but she would admit that it was a pitch and putt affair. So for all those girls to get better, they've got to start playing LPGA length courses. And they can't beat the men in the same field playing a course that long. So you handicap it by, or you adjust the par. So handicap's a bad word, but if you play the 12th at Royal Melbourne, 435 metres, par 4 for the men, which it is, par 5 for the women. And at the end of the week, because you've adjusted the pars, there's an 8-shot difference, then I think that's the best way to play it. Because I think it gives the women a chance to realistically assess how good they are. Assess how good they are. But if you just stick them on the forward tees in an attempt to even up the scores, then it's kind of you're kind of getting a false score, I think, because it's nowhere near what they're going to face when they play the LPGA Tour in America. And that's what you're training them for. That's the whole point of this tour, is to give the kids the skills and the experience to go and play overseas. And if they go overseas and play the LPGA Tour on courses that are still too short but 500 yards longer than they're playing here, then that's not how they're going to get better.
Clyde, you mentioned the private promoters that used to be in the game and how much they drove, I suppose, the momentum and the energy that used to be in the tour here in Australia. I wonder, in your estimation, what the roadblock is to someone like that coming back, because I refuse to believe, given I suppose the demographic of golf community here in Australia, or predominantly so, there's wealth there that you would think they have a passion enough for the game that they'd invest in order to bring people here. But I don't know whether or not we've got potentially the right structure or the right people involved to unlock that potential. We seem so tied to state governments and their funding, their ability to bring tournaments into states. We seem to have an inflexibility in our schedule. I mean, if we're going to play our major tournaments when the PGA Tour is kicking off in Hawaii each and every year, then what incentive other than cash, which we can't seem to unlock, is there for anyone to come home? So I wonder what you think is the big blocker at the moment to bringing those people back into the fold, because they must be out there. They must have a passion and be ready to invest.
Well, I mean, Frank and David made a good living, and Tony Rosenberg around the Heineken tournament, Bob Turi around his tournaments. Those guys made a good living out of running golf tournaments. So you need entrepreneurs who can pick up an event, start an event, and feel like they can make money out of it. Now it's more difficult because the appearance money's gone through the roof. You've got to. I mean, the Masters started off as a $60,000 tournament. So to get off the ground now, to attract any sort of field, you've got to start at $1 million probably. So you need people to go bang on doors of corporate Australia with a vision and a passion and try and unlock some of that money. Do corporate Australia want to back golf? I guess that's the question. And it's certainly a lot of corporate executives who play golf. The question is, do they care enough about golf to invest in it? And the thing that's really killed our tour, or one thing that's really killed it, is the wraparound tour in America. I mean, the US tour couldn't care less about golf outside of the PGA Tour. But when the tour finished, when the season started in January, if Cam Smith and Mark Leishman and Aaron Badley and Jeff Ogilvy and Robert Allenby, if they all had good years, if they'd made all their money by September or October, they could come home and play free of being worried about guys getting an 8-tournament head start on them for when they turned up in the middle of January and found themselves $3 million behind the guys leading the main list. So, of course, they want to finish up the FedEx Cup, but then they're pretty much playing the next week, getting the following season started. So that's killed our tour, really, because it really stops those guys coming back and playing here. And if we ran the Australian Open, sure, I mean, some of them would come back, but at some point, if you listen to Andy Johnson and the guys on the Fried Egg podcast in America, Americans who slaughter their tour, slaughter the PGA Tour, because they say they play way too much. It's a 50-week, never-ending, non-stop circus of 72-hole professional tournaments that everyone's fed up with. So their argument is stop the tour after the FedEx Cup and give it a rest. And that's perhaps that's partly bought on the Saudi thing, or which is separate from the Premier Golf League, which is still, I assume, still bubbling along in corporate offices in London. I'm not sure when they're going to show their hand, but at some point you hope the PGA Tour decides that playing 50 or whatever they play, I mean, what do they play, 48 times here, I don't know, it is too much. And give the rest of the world a break. I mean, there used to be great tournaments in Japan at the end of the year where the best Americans would go and play in Japan. Seve would go and play twice. Seve would come and play twice a year in Australia and twice a year in Japan at the end of the year. Now, Seve's equivalent, say Rory McIlroy, he's not doing that. He's just staying in America and playing in America. So it's, in some ways, as much as I detested what the Saudi thing stood for, the PGA could do everyone, the PGA Tour could do everyone a favour, including themselves, by playing a bit less. And that would certainly help our tour, because it would free our guys up to come home and play.
I think it's really it's really interesting though. Like, I think you look at it's a great point that you make about the calendar. I probably haven't really thought that through in its full extent, but I feel like we've been so reticent to even explore other options to change. And if you look at the way that sport's gone in this country, you look at the success of the Big Bash in the past 9 years, albeit it's probably waning a little. If there are alternative formats of the game out there, and I think of Blitz Golf, who, we're massive supporters of what they do, is there an opportunity for a 6-week Blitz Golf League to run around the state and really find around the country and find new people to bring into the game? Because, I mean, I love golf. I co-host a podcast on golf where we talk about it for 3 hours every week. but I can't bring myself to watch 72 holes of golf across 4 days. It's a lot of golf to wait for 4 days for a result. It's the same with test match cricket. It's the same with a lot of other sports. So I'm wondering if there are alternative formats of the game. And I think that's why your tournament was so successful down in the Sandbelt. It was something different. And I guess, do you think there's an appetite for that within golfing fraternities and around the country to just explore alternative formats of the game?
Well, I think they're kind of doing that with, I think they'll finish up with a mixed Australian Open at some point. The Vic Open with the men's and women's field.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Vic Open was a great tournament when the LPGA and the European Tour played. It wasn't a great tournament. The US Open was a great tournament, so let's not confuse great with.
Yeah.
But it was a great event where the people of the Bellarine Peninsula and Geelong embraced it and loved walking the fairways, bring your dog, free entry, easy car parking, access. It's a really cool event. I think that's really innovative. So Niall Horan's manager of One Direction fame came down here and started the same event in Northern Ireland a year later. So, I think we've been incredibly innovative. I mean, I must admit, I've never watched a big batch game of cricket. I don't watch Test cricket either, but I can listen to Test cricket on the radio all day. Driving there, I love listening to cricket on the radio. I love listening to golf on the radio, but I don't watch much golf. I listen to more podcasts than I do watch golf. And I watch the majors and the Players Championship, and I love to go and watch live golf. Golf on TV is not doing it for me at all, but to me the thrill is actually going and watching golf live. So this is a bigger point, but part of the problem with the Australian Open is that I'm old enough to remember when it was in Hobart in 1971, 51 years ago, then Adelaide the next year, 72, Royal Queensland 73, Lake Clarion 74, and that was the end of it. But there was this rotation that had gone on in the 50s and 60s, which I thought was great for the Open, because every 6 years you kind of knew it was coming around and coming back. But why would anyone in Perth care about the Australian Open when they haven't seen it for almost 50 years? It's ridiculous. But we've got into this, the trap of, and it's been lucrative for golf, of state governments essentially buying the Open, and it's been in Sydney since 2005 or 6. So no one's really. It was going to be in Melbourne at Kingston in 2020 and got cancelled. It's in at Victoria this year, so that's the first time it's been out of Sydney in a long time. But the Open needs to go in the country. We need more mixed events. I think we can do, one-day blitz golf things in tournament weeks at different courses, perhaps, or the Portsea Pro-Am was a great tournament. We lost Bob Shearer was a stalwart of the Portsea Pro-Am. Jeff Ogilvy, John Vandervelde played it the year after he lost the British Open. So that was a really cool one-day event on the 2nd of January that got a really big crowd, because it was, there were footballers there and cricketers, and it was a kind of cool, crazy event. So there's certainly room for innovative golf, but I'm too much of a lover of the old style form of the game. I love watching 72. I love being at 72-hole golf tournaments, but I'm like, I don't love watching them. I'm not going to sit down and watch Thursday at Riviera.
No,
just not interested. And that's partly the problem with the PGA. Well, it's partly the. Well, it's not the PGA Tour's problem, because PGA Tour doesn't have a problem. They're giving Phil Mickelson $8 million, and he's crying about obnoxious greed 2 months later. Jeez, give me a break. But the US Tour is doing fine. I mean, the one thing that, I was never a good enough player to be a part of it, but I think if Seve and Nick Price and Norman and Faldo and Lyle and Langer and Dennis Watson and the best Graham Marsh non-American players had gotten together in 1980 when Norman was established, Seve was a 2-time major champion, Faldo and Langer were just obviously going to be stars. If those guys had all gotten together and said, let's create a great world tour that wasn't predicated on a few of them getting super rich, but creating something that was a great world tour that went through Japan, South Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe, Britain and Europe, they could have created something that by now would have been way bigger than the US Tour. but whether they didn't have the foresight or they didn't, they were, in fairness, they were 24 years old. So it needed someone to sell that concept to them and for them to embrace it and say, okay, screw the Americans. We're going to create something that's equivalent to the Formula One kind of racing circuit and create 35 great tournaments around the world. And that would have been the Great World Tour, as opposed to what Greg and Rupert Murdoch proposed in whenever that was, 1992 or 3. And then Greg with his his elephantine memory and lusting for revenge on the tour, trying to create this Saudi thing. Well, that's kind of not what the game needs, I don't think. It doesn't need a bunch of super rich guys getting even more rich and blowing up the US Tour. As much as I dislike what the US Tour has done to the World Tour or the Australian Tour in Europe, it doesn't need blowing up either. So, the question is, how do you look 30 years into the future and create, for me, I still think there's a place for a great world tour for the players out, for non-American players who don't want to live in America. The problem is there's so much money in America now that why wouldn't you want to live in America? But it's a pretty uninteresting one-dimensional tour that makes a whole lot of guys really rich. I think you create something that's way more interesting if you went through South Africa. If you started South Africa, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, drag Canada in because the Canadian Open's been screwed by the US Tour. Europe and Britain, you can make a phenomenal tour.
I think it's the pipe dream of most golf fans is to have that. And I think the PGL is kind of looking at something similar to that in what I can understand. It's obviously very different to the Saudi piece. Is just, listeners to this show will know our thoughts very, very clearly on what the Saudis have proposed. But one that I did want to mention, just around your tournament that you ran down there, how do you feel that the PGA Tour of Australasia doesn't have a tour stop in the Sandbelt? I feel like there's so many courses that have made tournaments their home. You look at the Vic Open and what happened down at 13th Beach, and that's fantastic. But we were talking a couple of weeks ago, KM, that it just seems criminal that we have one of the best, if not the best, area of golf in the world, and we don't play a tournament in any of the courses. Am I on the mark with something there, or is it the members aren't interested, or what do you think it is?
No, the members absolutely are interested. Well, we had the President's Cup in 19, and we were going to have the Open at Kingston Heath in 20. We've got the Open at Victoria in 22 this year.
Yeah.
So it was really only 1 year. But you're right, which is why we started the Sandbelt tournament. That the Sandbelt needs an annual tournament, and we had the Masters at Huntingdale, and we lost. 30 years ago, we had the Coca-Cola at Royal Melbourne, we had the Heineken at Royal Melbourne, we had the match play at Kingston Heath, we had the Vic Open that went around the Sandbelt. We had, in 1989, I think we played, or 87, we played 5 tournaments in a row in Melbourne. Played the Victorian PGA at Keysborough, match play at Kingston Heath, Vic Open at Kingston Heath in consecutive weeks, the Coca-Cola at Royal Melbourne, and we played another one somewhere else. But you're right. There needs to be an annual tournament in the summer, which I think is what our tournament's going to turn into. I think we'll turn that into what the Australian Masters was.
Awesome.
So that's kind of the plan and the vision. So I think we can do that. So that'll be. I think it's rather than having it. Well, it was at Huntingdale for however long it was. 20 years, and then we played one at Metro, a couple of Victoria, the Tiger Woods one at Kingston Heath. But I think the format of playing, which is a bit like the Blitz Golf thing, the Sandbelt tournament felt like 4 different tournaments. Well, Kingston Heath was a different vibe to Royal Melbourne, which was different to Yarra, which was different to Peninsula, and it felt like you were going to a different tournament every day. So, yet it culminated in one semi-12 tournament. So I think that's potentially a good format. So if we can kind of, pull it off and make a decent tournament out of that, then I think it's going to be good. But we're never going to pay anyone any appearance money. It's going to rely on Minwoo Lee and Min Ji and Hannah and Kari and Sue and Adam, and Jeff twisting a few arms behind players' backs at Augusta in April when he's over there. We need you guys to come back and play, and it's always going to be a limited field. It's going to be maybe 40 pros, because the idea is it's really a mentorship thing where the best players in Australia come back and play with the best kids. So Adam Scott plays with Amelia Harris, and she blows her brains out because she's playing with Adam Scott, but she gets to spend 4 hours with Adam or Jeff or whoever, and she played with Peter Fowler this year, and she gets to learn how to play golf and gets to watch how those guys go about their business. So by the time she's 20 and she's played with Kari Webb and she's played with Sue and she's played with Hannah Green in the Sandbelt tournament at Royal Melbourne and Kingston Heath, by the time she's 20, she's ready to go. They've taught her everything they know. So that's kind of the idea behind it. So I think it's a great story to sell. It's mixed golf. I think if you can't get corporate golf to back it, then there's no hope for corporate golf in Australia then. But, I think if we can get as passionate as Frank Williams and David Inglis were about the Masters, about the Sandbelt tournament, then I think we can create something that's really good. But it's going to rely on our best players coming back and supporting it. And if they don't support it, then it'll go somewhere, but it's not going to go as far as it can.
Do you think, Clates, obviously it exists to varying degrees, not at all in some and probably far stronger in others, but do you think there still is an innate sense of responsibility amongst those players to give back and to try and make themselves available where possible to come and provide, that level of mentorship you spoke about? We spoke about a little earlier in this week specific to the TPS Murray River, but that Saturday round that young Sheridan Clancy from Lake Karrinyup Golf Club played with Hannah Green, I would imagine in years to come will have done more for her development over those 4 hours than any amount of time on the range at Lake Karrinyup, simply by osmosis and by playing alongside one of the best players in the world. But as you say, it relies on their drive to come back and give back. And it seems, as I said, to varying degrees, exists certainly like a burning fire in some. You think of the examples of the stories we've heard over guys like Jed Morgan and Louis Dobler spending, 3 or 4 weeks over at Cam Smith's place he hosted in Florida, and what that does for them. But it's not everyone, is it, who feels that?
Well, it's not. And, without mentioning names, I think part of the problem is American player managers who don't do much to encourage their players to go home. And we haven't seen Jason play here for how long since Jason came here? I mean, it's just, years, really. And I don't count the President's Cup. That doesn't count. But coming back and playing the Australian Open and not taking, I don't know what he got paid to play the Australian Open, but you can bet it was
handsome.
A lot. Enough to buy a 2-bedroom house in Paran or South Yarra in Melbourne. But perhaps not, certainly a 2-bedroom apartment.
Back then, maybe, not now.
Yeah. But, I think that, and no one's, you can't force them to come back, but the tour was there for them to start out at, because Greg Norman came back and because Peter Thompson and Cal Nagle played every week and Bruce Devlin came back and David Graham came back and Graham Marsh came back and all those guys came back and played. So if this generation decide they're not going to come back and play, then it'll go away. So, again, that's why we started the Sandbelt tournament. You've got to rely on it to play the Australian Open. The women are great. I mean, the women are so much better than the men because they have to be, because the men are so pampered and they make so much money and they're so rich now. And there's a pension scheme that gives them 30, 40, 50, $60 million when they're 55 years old, that why would you bother to come back and play a $1.5 million Australian Open? Aside from the fact that you might feel an obligation to play. But, the women are playing for, the US Women's Open is it 10 million this year? But the average person on the LPGA Tour is $2 or $2.5 million. Maybe the average person is probably $2.5 million, maybe $2 million. So they can't afford to stick their heads up their ass and not come back and play. They've got to come back and they all have to support the LPGA Tour all around the world. So they all do. And it's a great tour. But if they were playing for $10 million a week and they're all super rich, and I wonder if they would feel the same obligation to support the tour. But they understand on some level that if they don't all support it, it'll go away too. But the PGA Tour is never going to go away. Like I said, there are so many guys who are so wealthy on that tour that how much obligation do they feel even to that tour, let alone how much obligation do the Australians feel to coming back and playing the Australian Open and the Australian PGA and occasionally playing the Vic Open and, I don't know. But as we've seen with Mickelson, every action has a consequence.
Let's talk a bit about your day job. And I've got to be honest, Clayton, I don't know where you find the time to design and build courses in between all of this tournament directing and caddying and writing and podcast appearances. But there's so much to talk through, not just, I suppose, your catalogue of already completed courses, but all the stuff that's to come. But I kind of want to maybe take it right back to the chicken and egg question. Were you always an architect, you think, that maybe your playing career got in the way of, or did the architecture build in terms of its passion through your playing career? What came first?
Well, I was always interested in everything about golf. I can't believe. Elvis didn't know anything about golf. Nothing. These kids have got no clue about golf, and in fairness, some of the guys. Grades I don't think knew much about the history of golf either, but I was a voracious reader of the history of golf because history was one thing. My grandfather was a 40-year history teacher at Scotch College in Melbourne. It was the only subject I was any good at. So I always had a love of history. So I read about the history of golf. So I was always interested in it. So by osmosis, I guess I was always interested in architecture. I knew who Alistair Mackenzie was, partly because I grew up in Melbourne, and anyone who grew up around rural Melbourne knew that Alistair Mackenzie designed it. But I'd read books about architecture. I had no interest in working in it, but I wrote about it. And there was a superintendent in Melbourne called John Sloan he was the superintendent at Woodlands, and I wrote an article about Sanctuary Cove. It was the second article I ever wrote for The Age in Melbourne, where I was kind of, my last line was, the Sanctuary Cove, it may well prove to be the toughest course in Australia, but few will be fooled into thinking it's one of the greatest. And John wrote me a letter and said I'd accepted the position as the superintendent at Sanctuary Cove that weekend. And I read that article you wrote, and I knew you were right. And I rang him up and told him I wasn't going to come. So 5 years later, we started a business together. And I didn't speak to John between, I didn't know him. I said thanks. And he and a guy called Bruce Grant, who ran the maintenance at the National, decided to start an architecture business and asked me if I was interested in getting involved in it. And it was 1995. So they asked me because I'd written about architecture. They liked what I was saying. They liked what I thought, and thought I'd be a decent guy to partner up with. So that was really how it started. And it was probably a coincidence that I lost my card the next year in Europe. And I was 39. I played rubbish, and I said to my wife, "Well, let's go home and get stuck into this business." And I loved it. We went to all the committee meetings, all the stuff that most people would think was pretty boring. I loved it. I went to the committee meeting in Victoria every month, and we talked about the golf course, and we started working there. And John and Bruce had some good connections at clubs in Melbourne, so we did master plans for Spring Valley and Long Island and Cranbourne and Rosanna, and so we kind of got started that way. But it was something I really enjoyed doing, and I loved it. And we got some decent jobs, and I think we did some decent work, and so it's really been a fun second career, really, which I think is the hardest thing for any professional sportsman, golfer or cricketer or whatever, is to what do you do after it's all over. And you think when you're 25, if you're Elvis and you said, what do you want to do when it's over? I think his answer would be, well, I want to make enough money between now and when I'm 40, so that when I'm 40, I don't have to do anything. Which sounds great when you're 20, go buy a nice boat and float around and fish, but you'll soon get tired of doing that. Or at least I think I would. So no matter how much money you make, you've got to find something to do after you're 40. And you can do what Bernd Langer's doing and be leading on the Champions Tour when you're 64. But it takes a pretty motivated, super person to be still playing as hard as Berner's playing. What he started when he was 18 on the tour, and he's 64, and he's still. I guarantee you his schedule's exactly the same now as it was in 1978. Every day would be exactly the same. So that's a pretty unique individual. So I was lucky enough to fall into, the things that I do really. I mean, caddying's only I caddied for Sue at the Australian Open when that was really the start of it, when she was an amateur in 2013 or 14, and we did the Kraft Nabisco together, and so I just kind of, different players would ask me, and I would, I'd pick up the bag for a week or two here and caddy for it, and I love doing that. But it's really a 4 or 5 week job. That's it. But we're building 7 Mile Beach in Hobart for Matt Goggin at the moment, so I'm down there, every other week really, which is great fun. I mean, Mike DeVries is down there with Lucas Michel, who played the US Masters last year. Lucas is on a bulldozer pushing sand around, which is not quite as glamorous as playing the US Masters and the US Open as the US Mid-Amateur Champion, but as US Mid-Amateur Champion, so it tells you something about. I mean, he's 28, and the question is, I mean, COVID's really hurt him. His plan was to go to the tour school 2 years ago, but he's being trained by Mike DeVries on how to drive a bulldozer and how to shape sand and how to shape ground and how to build golf courses. So, he's got a choice to make. Do I go down that road or I go down that road? So it's and he's working with a guy called Jurien van der Vaart, who's a 35-year-old Dutchman who played the Challenge Tour, played a few Dutch Opens, tried to get on the European Tour, started working for Frank Pont, my partner in Clayton, DeVries and Pont, and he's given up playing, and he's we played a bit when he was in Melbourne 3 weeks ago. Like, he's really good, but there are lots of guys who are really good, and he's chucked his lot in the architecture bin. So he and Lucas are on machines, getting taught by Mike DeVries how to build golf courses, and there aren't too many better teachers than that, and you don't learn that in 6 months, but you get a good feel for it. And I think we've got some decent work coming up. So they'll go from, once they're finished in Hobart, we'll send them off to jobs around the world. And if they get good at what they're doing and they've got a talent for it, then it's arguably I want to say it's less precarious way to make a living than playing golf is, but it's still it's not the easiest way to make a living. But it's a great way to make a living if you love it. And the guys who work for Tom Doak and Gil Hansen, Bill Core, who could easily go out on their own and start an architecture business, but they're getting the coolest projects in the world stacking up. And who doesn't want to go out and build amazing golf? And I think that this kind of era will be seen as one that, as it was in the 20s and 30s, that produced some amazing golf courses. So for kids like Jurien and Lucas, it's not the worst career path to go down.
We'll have to get Lucas back on the show. He's been on 3 times, Marshy, I think.
Oh, okay,
twice as a guest and once as a co-host. So we'll
even filled my seat there for 1 week. So
we'll get the goss on what sort of boss you are, Clates, and how bossy you are. Telling him to push barrows of sand around.
We're pretty soft.
I'm going to ask you a really shitty question that I'm going to forget to ask at the end. The best designed golf course in Australia, what is it? Can't be one of yours, obviously, Clates.
Oh, well, it wouldn't be. Anyway.
Is it Royal Melbourne? Is it as simple as that, or what?
Yeah, it's as simple as that, and there is only one answer to that question.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an amazing golf course that's built incredibly well, so well that they built a new 7th hole, I think in the 40s. The old used to go off the other side of the 6th green and play up the hill. The old green's still there, just in front of the 8th tee. So Ivo Witten built a new 7th hole in the 40s, and Claude Crockford moved the 12th green on the west course across, back and left, in the, I don't know when he did that, probably in the 50s, 40s or 50s. But aside from that, the course has essentially been unchanged, which shows how incredibly well the Morecambe's built it and implemented the principles that Mackenzie won't put on the ground. So, it's not even close for second, I don't think. Well, no, it's not even close for second. It's such an amazing place to play golf. It's, I've been playing there. I first went there in 1972 to watch the World Cup. I played there in 1974 for the first time, and so 48 years ago, and it's still as much fun to go there and play as it was then. And that's a pretty rare golf course that you're just as excited as playing 50 years after the first time you played it. So, yeah, and the best. I mean, the top 10 in Australia is so much better than it was 40 years ago. I mean, Kingston Heath you can't imagine how much better Kingston Heath is as a golf course than it was 40 years ago, before Graham Grant kind of restored it. Putting all the bunkers back at the 15th and the 12th, and chopping all the bad trees out of there and regrassing it and getting the greens hard and fast and rebuilding all the tees and we were the architects there I was for almost 20 years, and so Victoria is so much better than it was. So the quality of the top 10, 20, 30 courses in Australia is so much better than it was 40 years ago. So, but nothing's really even approached the quality of Royal Melbourne. So hopefully at 7 Mile Beach, I mean, the land's good enough to do something, perhaps in that league. I'm never going to say it's going to be better than Royal Melbourne, but it certainly sets a phenomenal standard, and one that everyone is striving to reach. Alistair McKenzie spoke about St Andrews when someone asked him about Cypress Point, which a lot of people would argue is the best golf course in the world, and he's kind of scoffed at the suggestion that Cypress Point was the best golf course in the world. He said Royal Melbourne's the only first-class golf course in the world. There is no second-class golf course, and Cypress Point's a very bad third-class course. So, I feel a bit that way about Royal Melbourne. And I still think you can make an argument the old course is the best course in the world. Certainly one of the best 3 or 4. So, Royal Melbourne's kind of the Australian version of that for me, really.
I think obviously I've not played Royal Melbourne or anywhere in the Sandbelt, but I was over there for the President's Cup, and it blew me away because I probably had very high expectations, and it still exceeded the expectations that I went in with. Just the amount of subtleties, but then not so subtle parts to it. There's bigger hills than I was expecting. The fairways were probably doubly as wide as I was expecting. And I would love to just go back and obviously, yes, play, but just walk around and take all of that in without the grandstands and without watching players, and just stand in different positions and see how it all pans out. I'm wondering how important that sort of part of designing a golf course when there is literally nothing there. And, following 7 Mile Beach at the moment, obviously a little bit of earthworks happening, but how important is it just going and walking around other golf courses without actually taking any sticks out?
I think it's really important because you can, you look at how the architects created the greens and the bunkers and how the whole thing ties in together. And I mean, Royal Melbourne's a phenomenal set of greens, and when it comes down to it, the best courses have got great sets of greens. Or perhaps not all of them, but almost all of them have got phenomenal sets of greens. You look at every one of those greens at Royal Melbourne; it's a masterpiece, it's a masterclass in what a great, individually how great those greens are. So when you go and build a course like 7 Mile Beach, you've got to, for a course to be remotely as good as Royal Melbourne, you've got to build 18 great greens. So you've got to find the great green sites and then shape them so well that when you finish, it's like, wow, that's an amazing set of greens. But you've also got to get from to the green with golf land that's exhilarating and fun and exciting that keeps you interested. And there's so many options. You never play 2 holes that feel the same, which is what Royal Melbourne feels like to me. It's the parts are great, but the sum of the parts is amazing as well. So it's it's fine to get the parts right, but you got to drag them all together and make it into a coherent, sensible golf course that stretches your mind and your shots. But it's a cliche, but it's still playable. But I think people it's a huge mistake to make that. People think that a playable golf course for everybody means that every shot's got to be playable. and that's not true at all. I mean, St Andrews is an incredibly playable golf course, but you put a 45 handicap woman or man in Hell Bunker or the Road Bunker or Strath or the Beardies, and they can't get out. They're done. Just pick it up and throw it out. So, we fall into this trap of, people complaining about severe work, because every golf course has got some severe work on it and severe holes and severe features. Any course worth its salt, where a player with an incompetent technique isn't going to be able to play it. So 7 Mile Beach is going to be incredibly playable, as St Andrews is incredibly playable, and Augusta is incredibly playable, and Royal Melbourne's incredibly playable, Kingston Heath. All the great courses are incredibly playable. But it doesn't mean every shot's playable for the worst players. And I think we tend to fall in that trap. You get, poor players who bitch about individual features, and that's unfair. And that, well, I could show you 15 things at Augusta and St Andrews and Royal Melbourne that would qualify as unfair if you built them now. But because they're so accepted as people, they're great courses, so they're beyond criticism. But if you built, the old course now, people would think it was ridiculous, unfair, stupid. The 11th hole goes across the 7th. Often the best way to play the second shot, the 5th hole, the 14th hole is to play it down the 5th fairway, double greens, bunkers you can't get out of. It's complete madness, but it's great. So if you try and make something that's, fair and playable for everyone, you're going to finish up with the most boring golf course in the world, probably.
Be very Richard Bland. Clayton, I've got a two-parter for you, but I need you to answer the first half. Do you still get nervous after all this time and after all these projects? Is there an element of you at the very beginning when you've put in a tender, you've won the bid, you are the architect who's in charge? Is there still an element of nerves to know that there's a responsibility and expectation at the back end of this that we produce a great course?
I get nervous about it. I mean, you understand the responsibility, but I've never got nervous about it because I've always worked with great people. So I'm not nervous about 7 Mile Beach because I know Mike DeVries is one of the best architects in the world. And I wasn't nervous about Barnbougle when the only brief was, from Richard Sattler, who didn't play golf, was he said to Tom Doak and I don't care what you do, just don't screw it up, which is the perfect brief. But when you work with Tom and Brian Schneider, who has done the shaping, who works for Tom, then you're not nervous when you're working with guys like that. And I always said, John Sloan and Bruce Grant were phenomenal partners to be with. So I was never nervous because I always knew I had great people around me. So no, I don't get nervous, but you understand the expectation and the responsibility not to screw it up. And which is not to say you don't get everything right, but I think we've done a pretty decent job in getting most things right.
The second part then may have been a little bit more contingent on you saying, yes, I do get a little bit nervous, but let me reshape it in that sense. So, and noting that it may not be easy to just elevate one above the other. Maybe they are the same level of responsibility, but in different ways. But how do you compare, say, the two projects you've just mentioned in 7 Mile Beach and Barnbougle? Well, you are presented with a phenomenal piece of land, and it's essentially a blank canvas that has the potential to be a phenomenal course. How do you compare that responsibility to, say, somewhere like Royal Queensland, where you've got the legacy of Alistair Mackenzie hanging over that course? It was a unique job, but I'm sure, given your love of history and your love of Mackenzie, you felt a sense of responsibility not to walk away from his blueprint that he'd left there so long ago.
Yeah, well, they're kind of, I guess, different jobs in the sense that one was an existing course, so you've got an existing core of members who expect a lot. Whereas at 7 Mile Beach and at Barnbougle, all we have is one client who expects a lot. So if you screw up and make a mess of it, no one cares because there are no members. The client cares because it's going to cost him money. But there aren't 1,500 members who've been members of a club that's existed for 100 years and are expecting something really good out of it. And you're paying you pretty well to do it. So in a sense, they're different responsibilities. And I've often said that if you can't annoy 20% of the members with what you do, you're not even trying. So there's always going to be a core members who criticise what you do, but I think in time that you know what good stuff is and what bad stuff is, and if you do good stuff, then that's all you can do. But it's a different responsibility because it's a responsibility to 1,000 members or 1,500 members versus one client, and they're different responsibilities, but equally weighty, really, I guess. Does that kind of answer it a little bit, or?
For sure.
Let's talk 7 Mile Beach, Clayton. I think this is the most exciting project in Australian golf for quite some time. Just looking through on the website, there's some fantastic progress reports from Matt Goggin. The piece of land looks absolutely phenomenal. I guess I wonder can you give us a timeline, I guess, that you're working towards, and then maybe how good do you think this can be? Because I've heard you describe this, that it could be better than Barnbougle, which is immensely high praise for a course that is so well loved by the Australian golfing public. Yeah. So how good do you think it can be? Where, world rankings, Australian rankings, I mean, is that even a consideration? How does that all come into it? And maybe that timeline you're working towards as well?
Well, I think we're kind of in the middle of next year, probably. I mean, Matt, we did a TV thing down there when he was out in 4 or 5 weeks. And he said sometime between January 1 and December 31. So that's kind of but it'll be next year.
Diplomatic.
Yeah. I shouldn't say better than Barnbougle. I think it's probably a better piece of land than Barnbougle, only because it's bigger. But Barnbougle was such a restricted strip of land between the beach and the farm. So it was great for what it was. It had great movement, all sand. It was no doubt it was a great site, but it was a narrow strip, and we were really restricted in terms of the directions we could go. Basically, it's out and back. But 7 Mile Beach is bigger, wider, broader. It gives us more scope to move around. So in that sense, it's got a chance to be better than Barnbougle because it's a better piece of land. But Barnbougle's I think I love it. It's a brilliant golf course. Bill Core, the bit of land Bill had for Lost Farms, a bit more like the land we've got at 7 Mile Beach. It's a different shape, so Bill could go in different directions and change angles and directions more than we could at Barnbougle Dunes. So it's they're all great sites, and I think we've got a pretty good routing. In fact, a really good routing. You walk over it and you get the sense that I think Royal Melbourne's probably got 12 great holes, like great holes as in world-class holes, sort of in the top 200 holes in the world, perhaps. So I think 7 Mile Beach has got a chance to, there are a lot of holes you walk there that, wow, this is great. This could be great. And if we screw them up, then they won't be great at all. But if we can get them right, then I think it's got a shot at having the same, similar number of really world-class holes as Royal Melbourne does, and perhaps Barnbougle. I would say, talking about sums of parts, Kingston Heath might have 1 or 2 world-class holes. But it's a world-class course because the sum of the parts is so impressive. It's a great green, great greens, great vegetation, great condition, great routing, some unusual shots, quirky shots. But really, if you were pressed to how many holes that Kingston Heath would get in the top 200 or 300 in the world, 15 probably would, 16 maybe. But in Metro, where I'm a member, I've loved that golf, played there for 45 years. Wouldn't have, of course, 1 world-class hole. But it's a terrific golf course. But because it doesn't have the land, it doesn't have the great individual holes that make something truly world-class. So, but I think the land at 7 Mile Beach gives us a shot to do that. So it's our responsibility to kind of pull that off and make sure that we make the 8th hole the great par 4, that long par 4 that it can be, and make 3 the great rollicking wild par 5 that it can be, and 10 the great short par 4. And we've kind of shaped out the 13th hole as a short par 4, and I think it's like really good. So, if we can kind of cumulatively pull together a decent number of great holes, but make it a sensible golf course at the same time, and I think we can do that. And of course, the great thing is it's such a good site that you walk off one green onto the next tee. So, it's not like you're sort of searching for the next great hole. When Matt and I walked around the land, when it was covered in trees, you couldn't see more than 20 yards, but you still got the sense of, wow, this is really good. But once the trees come off, you literally you walk off every green and step onto within 5 or 10 yards, step onto a tee, and there's another great hole. And that thing gets repeated 18 times over, to the point where Mike and I walked the West Course, which is still in the pine trees, where Matt's got the lease to build the second golf course. We walked out the other day, and it's like Mike had never. It kind of walked it quickly when he first got there. We spent 5 hours out there, and it was like, he said, "This is like really good. This is like amazing how good this is." And it's completely different to the site we're working on now. But the 15th green on the West Course is literally 15 yards from the 7th green on the course we're doing now. So these two bits of land are right up against each other, but they're really quite different. So it's but we walked around this bit of land in 5 hours, and we were walking off one green, walked 5 yards across, there's another great hole, and you walk 400 yards or 500 yards or 140 yards, walk 5 yards, there's another great hole, and you just follow your nose right in holes, and well, there's a great course. So it's and Bumbugle Dunes it was easy-ish, but it was not that easy. But of course, there are also 1,000 holes out there at 7 Mile Beach. So how do you pick out 18 out of literally 500 holes? How do you pick out 18 of them?
I think what's got me excited about this is the proximity to Hobart as well is just so much of an asset to a course like this, and hearing you talk about it just makes me more excited to eventually come and play there whenever we're allowed to here in Western Australia in a couple of weeks and when it opens up. But it's just, I think that proximity to such a major capital city is going to be so valuable. I mean, Barnbougle is clearly a lot harder to get to than what 7 Mile Beach is going to be. Cape Wickham is, very, very difficult. Well, not very difficult, but immensely harder to get to than Barnbougle again. So I guess that must make you really excited as well to know that it's going to be frequented so regularly, being so close to a major capital city.
Well, all the great remote golf courses, starting off with Sandhills in Nebraska in 1993. I mean, the nearest town's got 400 people in it. The next nearest town's 80 miles away. I mean, there's literally nothing out there. So, and then Mike Kaiser did Bandon Dunes, Sound Valley in Wisconsin, Castle Stewart near Inverness, Cabot Links, all these great courses that have been built in the last 30 years. They're all remote. Barnbougle Dunes, Cape Wickham.
Tara Edie.
They're all in out-of-the-way places. Cape Kidnappers. This is 5 minutes. Well, it's not, because they closed the quick route off from the airport to 7 Mile Beach. You have to go around the airport now.
It's rude.
So it's 10 minutes from the airport. So I could decide with some friends tonight, let's go to Hobart tomorrow, jump on a Jetstar flight down there, the first flight down there, play 36 holes and be home in time for dinner. Take the 6 o'clock plane back. So, that's why it's such an amazing site for a golf course. And it's 25 minutes out of Hobart, 20 minutes out of Hobart. So unlike all of these great remote courses. It's actually in a city, which is not in the middle of America. I mean, Tasmania is remote for what's, it's hard to get to from Perth. It's not that remote from Melbourne or Sydney, but it's remote from Los Angeles or London. But, I think it's going to be, now that Tasmania's got the 3 courses at Barnbougle plus Cape Wickham plus 7 Mile Beach and the Sandbelt and the Mornington Peninsula, if the golf nuts want to come out to Australia and from America and Europe and play, what's that? It's 15 pretty darn good courses. So it's a world-class trip that we didn't have 40 years ago, because you would come and play Royal Melbourne, and compared to what they are now, substandard versions of Kingston Heath and Victoria, it was still pretty good, but it wasn't what it is now. It's truly a world-class trip now, and it's pretty easy to do. And I mean, Doak's redone Ocean Course at the National, the Gunnamatta's terrific. The Mooner course is fantastic. I'm not a great lover of the old course, but I understand why people love it. But I love the Mooner and the Gunnamatta. St Andrews Beach is great. Portsea, the Serena, the Dunes. There's so much good golf on the Mornington Peninsula. And the 2 courses at Peninsula. I keep saying Peninsula. Peninsula Kingswood are terrific now. So it's a phenomenal trip. And of course, we're over. Now you've opened the borders. Mike and Harley Cruz and I are over for Royal Perth in 3 weeks probably.
Yes.
Which, and you talk about, Royal Perth's not in the top 100 in Australia, I don't think anymore. But that's a really interesting job.
I think you've got your work cut out there, Clayton. I don't want to say anything too much against Royal Perth, but I played there a little while back, and it's there's interesting parts to the golf course, and one of my good mates is a member there, and he's really excited to have your hands on the course. But I think because it is such a flat piece of land, there's got to be creativity to come with it.
Yeah, and I only see upside, and I think that I played Sandringham today, and the rebuilt Sandringham, they did 18 great greens there. It shows that's a pretty flat, not that interesting piece of land. And it shows if you build 18 great greens, what you can do. And Royal Perth's a better site than Sandringham. And, I think if you build 18 great greens there, it's all sand. It's flat, so you can use it all. It's a small site, but it's flat, so it's all usable. And it's, I think you can make it, you can make Royal Perth pretty good. I mean, not perhaps top 20 in the country, but, way more interesting and more fun than it is. So, so in that sense, it's a really interesting job, because, Royal Perth should be a really good golf course. Royal Perth, for God's sake.
Yeah.
It should be really good. So I'm kind of, and I'm interested. I mean, Harley's obviously seen it. I've seen it a lot. Mike DeVries never seen it. So we've kind of made this pact that we're going to walk the course with Mike, but not say a word to him, and just see and just wait to see what he says and what he sees. Because Mike and I walked Port Fairy about just after he got here, just before Christmas. And I knew that he would see something that I've worked there for 15 years, walked that course 100 times, and I knew he would see something that I'd never seen before. And he did, and it was like, how can I not see that? It's so obvious. But he'd never seen it. He walked up off the second green, looked backwards down the fourth, and pointed and I'm going, shit, I've never seen that. I mean, it's just, so I know Mike's going to see stuff at Royal Perth that I haven't seen, and I've first played there in 1979, so 40 plus years ago. So it's going to be interesting. But I think we can, it's a really cool job, because it's all. If it was flat clay, then it's like not interested. But it's flat and sand, and it's Royal Perth, and it should be way better than it is.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it after you've been in there, because WA's got some great courses. So You'll have to make time. Every architect that we've had on this show, KM, where do you think I'm going with this question, this point right now? Every architect that I've ever spoken to on here, and Lucas, you can ask Lucas about this, but Lancelin.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Is
I need
it's
to see
primo. You need to get up there. We just need to find an investor, mate. Like, I don't know, we'll pull on some of that corporate Australia string that we were talking about at the top, and we need an investor, and we get your hands involved in it because it is, unreal.
Well, when Harley was working for Greg Norman, he visited a site, I think about an hour north of Lancelin.
Yep.
I can't remember what it was called. And he
Like
said,
Jurien Bay or something.
Yeah, I know, yeah, maybe up there somewhere. I mean, I've never been past Sun City, so don't you? But he said you can't believe how good this site is. So he's going to take us up there when we're over. So, but
Yeah.
I mean, all that land going up that coast. I mean, you guys it seems like you guys take it for granted, don't you? I mean, you drive up from Carrum to Sun City, and on the left side of that road as you go north, those amazing sand dunes, they're blowing up and putting houses on it.
Yeah, they're all houses now, mate.
I mean, how do you get away with that? I mean, in Europe, you wouldn't be allowed to build a golf course on it.
Mate,
It's just bizarre.
high density living, mate. That's just what we rock and roll with here in 3.5 hours north of Perth. But no, if you do get the opportunity, definitely go and check out Lancelin, because I just wish someone can go and see it, because it's got all the hallmarks of a friggin' unreal course, and I reckon you, with your eyes, would be able to go and see something very special there. So,
do they have any idea how good it is?
I don't think so. It's built around a footy oval, so you tee off.
Yeah, it's in Western Australia. Obviously, the football's the most important thing. We'll just flick a couple of holes around it.
I'll come with you, Clayton. Don't worry. Don't even have to ask, mate.
Right. Come here.
He'll pick you up from the airport. You won't even get to Royal Perth. He'll drive straight to Lancelin.
Exactly right.
Now, is it grass greens or sand greens?
Grass greens.
Grass greens. So
Grass greens.
So it was sand greens?
I as far as I know, it's always been grass. Always been grass. Not, it's not very well. I mean, it's well looked after for a country course.
Okay.
But yeah, just nice wide fairways already existing. I think it's the fifth hole. It's like a par 3 that just plays through these two incredible dunes, like a chute. I know all the courses, mate. I know all the holes at Lancelin, so I'll
Let's check it out. So what's let me ask you a question. What's Bremer Bay like? Have you ever been down there?
Yeah, Bremer Bay, very good, very nice. Yeah, golf course. I reckon golf course might be right. I don't know that there's a golf course in Bremer Bay though.
Yeah, there is.
Is there?
Yeah, yep. There was a guy who sent me pictures of it.
Okay.
There was a guy who said, "Do you mind if I send you these pictures and just tell me what you think about it?" And I sent him back a few notes.
Which is always easy to tell from pictures on a phone.
Yeah, it's always easy to tell from pictures on a phone. That's right. But let me Google Earth it. It looked really good.
Yeah, okay. I'll send you some photos of Lancelin.
It's a beautiful part of the world, Bremer Bay.
It is a very nice part of the world. I haven't been down there for years, so probably pre my love of golf. So that's exciting that there's some good spots around. Plenty of projects on the go then, mate.
And you want to talk about corporate support? We'll tee you up a meeting with Twiggy. He probably owns the Lancelin plot, given how far his country station extends up there north of Perth. So get Twiggy to throw some cash at it.
It's enormous.
I'm looking at the course at Bremer Bay. I've looked at it for years on Google Earth. It looks amazing. Right on the edge of the sea.
I'll have to have a look.
Check it out on Google Earth and go.
I shall.
It's an untapped resource, Western Australia. Tell you what's not untapped is yourself, Clayton. We've taken far too much of your time, and I barely feel as though we have scratched the surface. So, I mean, we didn't even talk about all your wins as a player. Well, we didn't even cover the great career with the sticks in hand. So,
don't talk about it. That's right.
We will have to have you back. Maybe once you've had a chance to get over to Perth and once you've dodged Nathan's calls, he tries to harass you to take you up to Lancelin. We'll have to have you back on, because as I said, we've barely scratched the surface tonight. But it's been a wonderful pleasure of ours to have you on this podcast. Hopefully the first of a few chats, and really appreciate you taking the time to join us from the 19th tee.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed it. It was fun.